Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hi, Shaketa. Thank you so much for joining this show. I'm so happy to have you on here. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. You're going to have an interesting hot topic, which I know my listeners are going to love. Just to kick us off, tell us about you and what you do and your expertise and everything so people can get a sense for all the wonderful things that you're doing.
Sure. Well, my name is Shaketa Robinson Bruce. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Georgia. I've been practicing for about 12 years now, and I have a private practice in Atlanta where my specialty is African American women who have survived and experienced childhood trauma.
Oh, deep stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Deep stuff. Tell us, can you tell me a little bit about, because I feel like every therapist that develops a niche as specific as yours and mine, there's a story that kind of goes behind that, or there's a reason why you became passionate about working with people like that. Can you tell me a little bit about why you decided to work with women that are like that?
Well, I think due to my own personal story, when I first started practicing, I was more interested in working with adolescent females. And I saw a lot of myself in the adolescent females that I worked with. And as I became older and became a mom, I started having more interest in the experiences of African American mothers. So the one thing the common thread I've seen in working with adolescents and women is there's usually some type of boundary that is injured in childhood that affects how we relate and interact in our relationships with others as we get older. And so that kind of helped me learn about myself and my relationships with others, but also kind of helped me want to know more about these experiences from childhood that kind of shape how we relate to others when we become older.
And you said a very interesting word, a boundary injury.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell folks what that is?
Sure. Usually our boundaries become injured in childhood due to some type of dysfunction, be it growing up where there's substance abuse or addiction in the family, if you see domestic violence or witness domestic violence among parents, any type of chaotic environment you grow up in where there's no stability, there's no sense of safety or protection. Those things are what can cause our boundaries to become injured in childhood and in turn affect how we conduct ourselves in relationships with others.
Right. And typically you start seeing people pleasers or the inability to say no, or, kind of letting people, stomp all over you with people who are wanting so much to be loved, to be wanted, to be validated, to belong.
Exactly.
Okay. And so you falling in line with your area of expertise that you work in, you decided to come on here and talk today about codependency.
Yes.
I love it. Tell folks that are not familiar, because I feel like that's one of those words that's kind of thrown around and
misused.
That people don't really know what that means, or they just kind of overly latch on to it. Can you tell me a little bit about what codependency is?
Yes. So the way I just explain it to clients is the root of it is basically putting the needs or desires of someone else before your own. Finding your value and identity in someone else. Having the need or finding your own value in of you being needed and taking care of others, not seeing yourself outside of that.
That is, can you tell us a little bit about the history of codependency, the word codependency, and where that came from? Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not. Why don't you can tell me that?
Well, I know, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe that Melanie Beatty coined the term originally, and I want to say it was back in the 80s that she came up with it, and she's not even, or at that time wasn't even a therapist. She was just someone that was kind of like involved in unhealthy relationships and kind of going through her own thing. And so then she actually wrote the book
Codependent No More.
Right. And all the other little sister books that go with that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's, if I'm recalling correctly, which yes, it's been a minute since I've delved deeply into the historical background, but if I remember correctly, that's kind of where it came from.
Awesome.
Yes.
I didn't know she coined. I'm familiar with the book and I've heard about it forever since I was in grad school.
Yes.
But I didn't know she coined the term.
Yes, she coined the term. She wasn't even in mental health or she wasn't a therapist or anything. Yes, she was like your average, woman, and not to put her down or anything, but, usually folks that do that kind of work are usually working in the field, but she was not. And so can you tell us, can we dive a little bit deeper and can you tell us a little bit more about the characteristics of what a typical codependent relationship looks like? And maybe can you even bring it to life for people that might, be in denial that they are codependent or may not be fully aware?
So some of the key things I see in clients is inability or difficulty saying no, feelings of guilt if they say no, fear of loss or fear of abandonment, feeling obligated, as if they owe a parent, for example, feel like they owe a parent, this amount of time or this amount of things because, they brought you into this world. So let me not tell them no. Let me not turn them down. So it's a fear of hurting someone's feelings, fear of loss of love. And so those emotions, that fear and that guilt is what drives people to feel the need to please. They have difficulty identifying their feelings. They have difficulty communicating their wants and needs. Those are some of the things I see a lot in the clients I work with.
Okay. And so what would be a codependent personality?
Codependent personality was kind of like a pattern of seeking the approval of others. That kind of being the main driving force in your actions, in your relationships, be it at work or in romantic relationships, just kind of constantly seeking out the approval and only finding value in being approved by others, validated in others.
So what are some of the ways that people try to seek approval?
Gosh, it can be a multitude of things. It's kind of going along with, the majority of something, or not feeling comfortable voicing their own opinions, just kind of going along with what the majority says, trying to fit in, not wanting to be ostracized or left out, things of that nature.
Okay. So then as you're talking, one of the things that kind of came up into my mind is codependency versus culture. There's a lot of cultures out there that believe you're supposed to take care of parents. You're supposed to take care of grandparents. You're supposed to give your parents whatever they want or whoever. And I'm saying parents, it could be spouses, it could be whatever. So what do you say about that? What do you say about codependency versus, historically the way things are done in other cultures?
I think it depends on the individual
Mm.
and their relationship with the parent. So as you're talking about culture and parents, what comes to mind is I don't remember who specifically it was, but it was like a popular athlete who had, I guess, stopped taking care of their mother. And,
Mm.
on the blogs and the comments, you were hearing, all these comments about, trashing this athlete. That's your mom. You don't do them like that. You
Mhm.
don't leave them out like this. And so people didn't understand the backstory behind why this athlete cut their mom off and stopped taking care of them. It was a toxic relationship.
Mhm.
It was unhealthy. It was
Mhm.
not in the best interest of this athlete to continue to be taken advantage of.
Mhm.
So you have to look at the individual and that particular relationship to determine, you know, what is best for you, what is in the best interest of you. And
Mhm.
you decide to do what is best for you because of what's in your heart and not out of obligation.
Okay. That's an interesting way to put it because a lot of people don't know the difference with that and they just feel like they're obligated to do that. And I've worked with a plethora of clients that are suffering because of this thing that's ingrained in their mind, whereas you have to take care of so and so and consider yourself last. If you can
Mm-hmm.
put your needs before everyone else's, or if you're not taking care of these other people, then you're just not a good son. You're not a good daughter. You're not a good wife. And so there's kind of this wrestling between what's how I'm hurting and
Mm-hmm.
what's been drilled into me.
Right.
So that's very interesting. So as you're talking about developing these relationships with codependency, um, can you tell us a little bit about what the consequences would be as a result of these relationships, maybe even over time?
What I've seen is burnout, like emotional burnout.
Mm.
A lot of times women, because that's who my majority of my clientele is, women, they express feeling drained, feeling exhausted, not
Mhm.
sometimes even resentful, because they're constantly pleasing the other person and not putting their own needs first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen that as well. And one of the things that comes to my mind as you're talking about the burnout is I feel like it's an interesting phenomenon. I don't know if you've worked with codependent relationships where one person has tried to start healing and not be codependent anymore.
Mm-hmm,
What
mm-hmm.
happens on the other end of that when one person decides to, like, okay, I'm not going to be so dependent on you, I'm going to develop my own identity and take care of myself and not really latch on to you anymore. Can you talk about
That
that phenomenon that happens?
yes, that is oftentimes met with resistance, because the other person is kind of like a rug is being pulled from up underneath them. That safety net is not there. That enabler has stopped enabling, and that's scary for the other person.
Right, right, right. Because, I would imagine that part of being in a codependent relationship is the identity of the person is based upon taking care of someone else. And when you take away that need to take care of that other person, they're kind of at a loss, like you don't need me anymore.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
that's a very interesting um, concept. So, do codependent relationships change over time? Do they become more enmeshed? Do they become more toxic?
I definitely think they become more toxic. And I think that happens because you kind of start to see the person that's doing the taking continuing to do that, but the other person who is codependent, that's when they begin to feel worn out, to feel exhausted and resentful.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes the communication can become passive aggressive, and sometimes it can become aggressive because they lash out.
Mm.
So
Mm.
it can become toxic in those ways.
Mm. And along those lines, can you talk about, codependent relationships, which we've touched on a little bit prior to this, codependent relationships that parents develop with their children? Kind of paint us a picture of what those look like.
Yes. So a lot of times parents will, have this old school way of teaching where, they kind of tell the child, you don't tell me no, you do what I say do. And, if a child hears that repeatedly, they begin to think, that's the case for all adults. Like,
Mm.
I can't voice my concerns. I can't express how I truly feel because there's going to be consequences or punishment. So a child can learn very early on it's bad to say no or it's bad to disagree.
Mm.
And so that's one way. Another way is oftentimes, little boys are told not to cry or that crying is just for girls. And so they are taught that's a bad thing. And in turn, they learn to kind of not know how to express their feelings, not how to speak up for themselves, how not to assert themselves. So that's another way you see a boundary being injured because they're not learning how to appropriately communicate their feelings.
Mm. And that's an interesting concept too, for men versus women. And I don't know if you work with men at all in your
I have
practice.
a few. I
Um,
have a few.
yeah, and I'm curious to know if the symptoms of people that come into, childhood victims of abuse, victims of child abuse, if their symptoms like that show up differently. Does it show up differently in your experiences in men versus women?
It is. Just in general, women are more vocal. They're more comfortable verbalizing their emotions and feelings. With men, it's a lot different. They internalize it and you see it manifest in anger. So oftentimes they get in trouble for acting out, or it shows in them becoming abusing substances or sex addiction. So it plays out behaviorally different in men and women.
Why do you think that is, that it plays out behaviorally different? And it seems almost like an extreme difference.
It is, and I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Boys are taught early on in childhood not to cry, not to show any signs of weakness, so to speak. And so they engage in behaviors that kind of numb their feelings.
Is more
So,
masculine, perceived to be more masculine.
yes, so substance abuse, gambling, sex addiction, those are ways to numb and not feel.
It's very unfortunate. Do you feel like because of the different ways that it manifests in men versus women, and women being able to verbalize and actually um, get in touch with their feelings because of the different ways that things are played out, do you feel like it's easier to treat one versus the other?
I don't, I think it would depend on the therapist,
Mm-hmm.
um, because I'm a trauma therapist and I love tackling childhood trauma.
Yeah.
It's, it's not, I don't want to use the word easy, but it's not hard for me to identify and point that out to a client.
Mm-hmm.
Once I'm able to do that, um, the defenses kind of go down once I begin to educate them on what this is and how this has affected you.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm able to make a connection with them that way, they're more receptive to it.
Okay. And I'm curious to know too, in your experience, is there a way that we can sort of prevent codependency?
I think it starts with parenting.
Okay.
We have to, as parents, allow our children to express themselves and not view it as them rebelling if they don't agree with us.
Okay.
As long as it's in a respectful manner, like we have to allow them the space to express themselves appropriately
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and allow them to just kind of get in touch with their own voice and not our voice, not, making or being guided by our voice, if
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Giving them a chance to develop their own voice, to speak up for themselves, because as adults, when those boundaries are injured, when you're talking about treating codependency, that adult who had who had these their boundaries injured as a child, they're going to have to learn how to communicate assertively, how to speak up for themselves, how to express how they feel, how to accept themselves and not seek out approval from others. And so those things can be prevented if we encourage and embrace those things in childhood.
As you were talking, I'm wondering, how do you treat codependency? Um, especially if it's something that's passed down generationally, or as we were talking about previously,
Mm-hmm.
culturally.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a cultural, it's just the way things are done, or just, intergenerational, like, that's just the way my mom was, my dad or brother or whatever. How do you treat something like that?
Well, I don't force my opinions and values on clients, but I would simply kind of reflect to them like, okay, you're doing it this way because this is the way your mom and grandmother done it.
Mm-hmm.
But how is it affecting you now? Do you have a positive quality of life as a result of the way you're doing it because of how it's passed down? So I would just point out and allow them to see if this is working for them or not. And if it's not, I would ask them, what are you willing to do about it? What do you want to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's nothing, then, that's their decision. But if they're willing to do something about it, we can look at educating
Okay.
and, behavior modification.
Okay. I think so. And maybe even just kind of taking a look back over the impact that it's had on the family over time,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even exploring the past history of how things have impacted them and the family
Mm-hmm.
and their livelihood.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Um, what are some ways in which, the one thing that I'm thinking about is we're talking about people that are very enmeshed and very dependent on each other.
Mm-hmm.
And they may not be able to have enough insight to see that there's a problem, but people around them are like, this is a really dysfunctional relationship, or, oh, they drive me crazy, or I just can't be around them. What are some things that we can say or do to bring awareness to people that are like that may not, that are caught up in a toxic relationship, but may not have the level of insight?
There's a book called Boundaries that I recommend to a lot of clients who come in with these problems or issues. It was recommended to me and changed my life. And so I recommend that to clients who come in with those type of questions and say, I'm overwhelmed, I'm frustrated. Why do I keep going through these things? Why does this keep happening in my relationships? I don't know what to do. I recommend that book, and it definitely brings some awareness to clients.
Okay. All right. So that's the number one thing that you would do. And so that sounds really good. But what if they are more or less like, I don't have a problem?
I would ask them, we would review their treatment goals.
Okay.
This is what you identified when you first came in.
Okay.
This is what you said you wanted to work on. One of those things you said you wanted to work on is improving your self-esteem or being able to manage your emotions better.
Okay.
So if these are your treatment goals, now you're saying you don't have a problem. That doesn't add up.
Yeah.
Help me understand what you're saying right here.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. And so what are some resources that you would suggest for people who have codependency issues and want to get help? I heard you recommend the book Boundaries. Any other resources that you would suggest?
Coda is a good website, coda.org. It has a list of characteristics to kind of help you identify codependency. Some things, has materials, resources, reading materials on there. It has frequently asked questions you could ask. And I think there's some information about 12 steps they follow and meetings that may be offered in your area.
Okay. Okay. And Shaketa, how can people get in touch with you if they want to touch base with you and talk to you?
Sure. My website is www.openarmscounselingcenter.com. My number is on the website, and I also have a Facebook page that's also Open Arms Counseling Center.
Okay, that sounds great. Are you working on any new or upcoming projects that people should be looking for?
Sure. I'm currently in a doctoral program, and I will be researching intergenerational trauma in African American women. And I will be speaking at a Bridging the Gap symposium in DC this May. And my topic will be intergenerational trauma there as well. And that will be primarily to other counselors who work with minority populations.
Okay.
But that will be my two upcoming projects.
That sounds good. I like that a lot. And I also did a dissertation study on that as well. So that
Awesome.
sounds really wonderful. So yeah, I think that'll be a great topic. Okay. So I think I'm so glad that you came on. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.